Hello, and thank you for joining us once again for the Adapt and Survive Skype video interview series presented and hosted by TRBusiness. I have the pleasure of speaking to Fraser Brown. He's a retail director at Heathrow Airport. Fraser, thank you for speaking to us today.
My pleasure.
Fraser, my first question for our viewers around the world who are not aware of the current operational situation at Heathrow with regards to its terminals, can you just briefly provide a bit of a picture of what that looks like?
Yes, and good afternoon to all your viewers. Heathrow, a lot of your viewers will know, was post-COVID the largest and busiest two-runway airport in the world, Europe's largest airport, the UK's only hub airport. And clearly since really February and March time, we've seen that airport transformed in the COVID environment. From operating from two runways, we're now today operating from a single runway, the northern runway at Heathrow, and from an airport that had 4 terminals, terminals 2, 3, 4, and 5. Today, we've consolidated the operations and we have passengers going through Terminal 2 and Terminal 5 only. So we've moved a large number of airlines from Terminal 4 and Terminal 3 into Terminal 2. And indeed, just yesterday, for the first time, we've got a non-IAG group airline in American Airlines who've started operations from Terminal 5. So there's been a significant amount of operational change. And obviously that's because the passenger numbers are significantly lower than that 80 million per annum that we would normally have. And indeed, if we look at May, just as an example, our passenger traffic was down about 97%. So as many colleagues around the world will have seen, sadly, the COVID issue has had a massive impact on our business, on the colleagues that work at the airport, not just for our company as the airport operator, but like any airport, it's a large ecosystem. We have about 400 companies that work at the airport, and on a busy day, up to 40,000 colleagues would have called Heathrow their place of work, 76,000 in total, and that's clearly changed quite significantly.
Indeed, Fraser, there has been a significant amount of operational change, particularly in the last 2-3 weeks with regards to the retail and F&B landscape. Just talk us through the reopening phases for the shops in particular. The virus's threat is omnipresent still in the UK. What has this reopening strategy look like, and what can we expect moving forward?
Well, the first thing to say is that clearly for us as an airport operator, looking after our passengers and making sure we look after our colleagues, whether, as I say, they're employed by the airport directly, and that's security officers and the like, or whether they are working for partner organisations like retailers, food and beverage operators, but also the police or control authority. Clearly making sure that they are safe is the paramount importance. And of course, at an airport, we've got a long history of that. That used to be around aviation security. Now it's really about making sure that people are aviation health safe. And we've been pushing for a long time, working with government, to get a common international standard for that safety so that passengers can fly and that citizens in a country can be comfortable that passengers are coming into their country. So we're really pleased working with government that we've got these air bridges, and that the UK government last week made some announcements, and actually tomorrow, the 10th of July, some of these corridors will start to open up. To answer your direct question about retail opening, of course, a couple of our retailers never closed. In the UK, essential retail has operated both on the high street and in travel throughout the lockdown, but obviously in a different way, whether that's respecting social distancing, which is a language we've all come to get used to, or making sure that things like screens and that colleagues have face masks. So our business partners, WH Smiths and Boots, have operated throughout this. Our staff restaurants in T2 and T5 operated by Eurest and the Compass Group have stayed open. But you're absolutely right. It's only in the recent weeks, now that non-essential retail has been allowed by the UK government to reopen, have we seen a much larger number of retailers reopen. As they've reopened, They all are following the UK government guidelines. So that is, as I say, around social distancing, around making sure that they're got an increased cleaning regime. Things like some of the experiential things in the traditional duty-free stores have obviously been removed in terms of particularly, as I say, beauty, but also alcohol trialing as well. At the moment, our restaurants are only opening on a takeaway basis, but from next week, we'll start to see some of the restaurants on a full service basis being open. So my summary is it would be a gradual reopening, and it's each retailer, each business partner working with us to make sure that their front of house is safe, both for passengers traveling and for their colleagues, but also that we get the supply chain right. You know, operating retail in an airport environment is even more complex than the high street. You can't just have the van pull up at the back with the products, whether that be food for a restaurant or whether it be general merchandise. We need to get our screening back up and running and all these things. So we've been doing that on a measured basis. I'm really, really proud of both my team and the retailers who have done that. And as of today, we've got over 50 retail and food and beverage outlets open now across T2 and T5. And they're opening on a daily basis. We've got a lot of our luxury retailers open. We have got grab and go food open, and we've got the main duty-free stores open in both Terminal 2 and Terminal 5.
The government's announcement, obviously travellers arriving from 59 countries, 14 overseas territories will now not have to quarantine for England's 14-day period. Specifically on that list, there's a number of key emissions, notably China. What's your perspective on the emission of China? Obviously, it's a key spending nationality at Heathrow. I'd like to get your reaction on that.
Well, the decisions on individual countries are clearly decisions for governments to make, and I'm not going to comment on that. What we are focused on at the airport is making sure that whatever nationalities are allowed into the country, we're prepared and we're ready to give them the best airport service that we possibly can. We are seeing flights. We are seeing Chinese passengers both coming and leaving. Clearly, the quarantine is an issue in terms of the demand. But as I said, the decision on whether or not to quarantine or not is clearly an issue that governments are weighing up. And what we would see, and I would reiterate what I said earlier, I think it's really important that the point that we've been making as an airport about common international standards becomes really important. We can actually, for travellers, irrespective of whether it's so-called quarantine-free or not, I think it's fair to say it is a complicated landscape for passengers right now. And anything that the industry can do, working with governments to make that a little bit clearer, will be very helpful.
Okay, let's move now, Fraser, if we can, to the support that Heathrow's been offering to its travel retail tenants during this very difficult period, including do-free from a fiscal perspective or otherwise. What has been the level of support that Heathrow has offered, and how long do you expect this to last?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that it's not just the retailers that are suffering or the food and beverage operators. We are all genuinely in this together. As I said before, we have lost in the month of May, just as an example, 97% of our passengers. Our revenues as an airport operator rely on passengers in the same way that revenues for retailers and food and beverage operators relies on footfall through the terminal. So the pain that we're all feeling, and it is painful for everybody, is not just confined to those partners, but clearly our business as well. We issued an investor report a couple of weeks ago, which laid out very clearly the state. But to answer your question directly, we have been discussing with a number of our retailers what we believe is a fair and an equitable way to treat what is an unprecedented situation. I think it's fair that none of us have got the COVID-19 business recovery manual. That didn't exist and wasn't written. So we're very much having case-by-case conversations with retailers, because those retailers and food and beverage operators are in a very different situation. Some of our retailers, for example, Terminal 4 operators, Terminal 3 operators, don't have passengers to go into at the moment. And that's one situation. Other retailers and food and beverage operators in Terminals 2 and 5 clearly do, but they're at reduced numbers. And equally within that, not just the split between passengers between retailers having in terminals with passengers, you've also got the different categories. And luxury retail has one set of dynamics, whereas a food and beverage grab and go is very, very different. So we're very much treating it as a case by case basis. Clearly, the details of that I'm not going to talk about. Those are commercially sensitive with each business partner. But the principle of treating people fairly, treating each situation on its own merits is the way that we think is right. It's the way we followed, not just actually for our retailers and food and beverage operators, but also equally for our property tenants and for our airline customers as well.
Obviously, luxury spending remains an important part of Heathrow's offer. People are talking a lot about revenge spending at the moment in China and what possible implications that may have for a spike in people flooding back to spend on high-end luxury goods. What's your view on this apparent phenomenon? And do you expect this sort of, I guess, ostentatious spending to continue and to come back very swiftly?
So I've heard the term. I think my overarching comment is I think it's far too early to say. I think it would be very difficult to extrapolate from what is some very small data points, I think, from one part of the world into another. We've been open now with non-essential retail since essentially only for a couple of weeks. It's early days. We'll see how we get on. What I would say is that with the help from all of our retail business partners who've opened up, we're seeing great levels of service, even in this post-COVID world where there's physical barriers with masks or visors. The team have come back incredibly energized and they're delivering great service. And I'm really confident that we will see good levels of sales on that basis. As I say, I think to try to get behind the psyche of consumers, I think it's too early to make general observations. What I would say is I do see there being a greater trend towards engaging with travel retail electronically than there has been. I know there's been a debate for a number of years about travel retail being in some way insulated from what has been happening with high street retail around the world. I think this will be an inflection point where just as consumers are engaging more and more with e-commerce in their daily lives, I think there'll be a greater expectation of engaging with e-commerce in their travel retail lives as well, both on relatively low-cost items like grab-and-go food, where they'll want to use a food ordering app to perhaps beat a queue or to reduce the amount of physical touch point. And we've been working with the people in Grab who do the Grab app. And certainly today in Terminal 2, for example, you can effectively purchase your coffee or your grab-and-go food from our Leon store through Grab app without having to go and order in the traditional way. And we'll be pushing the Grab app with our business partners to give people choice to engage electronically, but also to reduce touch points. And on our Heathrow boutique, which is where we make available a lot of our product to reserve and collect, we're seeing more and more retailers now keen to engage in that. And indeed, this week we just launched Burberry on there with a lot more SKUs than we had before. So we can see that consumers will want to do that.
Digital change is an inflection point, as you put it, and it's one that's no doubt long overdue. Thank you very much, Fraser, for your comments.
My pleasure.